Okay, we're going to be talking about the 4 Catholic final vocations. The reason I choose this term rather than the 4 states of life is that the 4 states of life, kind of similarly to the states of matter, suggest that they change or can change quite often. And the 4 final Catholic vocations are intended to be for life, and we believe that we're called to them for life. And also, we often don't realize them until later in life. And this is in the vein of everything is spiritual, that when we think about vocation in the sense of a Catholic vocation, we think of it as a total call on your life rather than merely a job. And I have this quote, "I've been invited to choose you, and I choose you." The reason I chose this quote is because we have these moments of calling, these moments where we can choose what is good, what is fitting, what is flourishing for ourselves and others. We find these cultural moments, these moments of decision. And my dream for you and for myself is to be able to recognize these moments where we can choose between these limited options, and that we could consciously choose it rather than pass it by or choose it only out of duty. And so we're going to be looking at vocation and the 4 final Catholic vocations today. I want to start my presentation on this by looking at an analogy. And I want to start with the milpa. The milpa is a Mayan form of agriculture that started in the Yucatan Peninsula, where a variety of crops, I think about a dozen, are grown together. And because of the properties of these crops, they all support each other and can allow for pretty extensive farming, that it balances out the soil, and then also the fruit of these crops creates a pretty balanced diet. Many people who study agriculture believe that the milpa is one of the greatest human inventions of all time. And when we think about a garden city, whenever I hear that, my historical mind goes off, and I was like, that's kind of like the Mayan milpa, that you have these crops that all work together and they make something that's pretty sustainable. Obviously, if we push it to the limit, we can break it, but it's sustainable and really good for both human flourishing and the flourishing of the earth. And similarly, when we combine these ingredients, now some of these are the post-Columbian exchange, but when we combine these things like corn tortilla or avocado, beans, and tomatoes, like all of these basic ingredients can be combined in a variety of ways to make really delicious food. But one of the things when we look at traditional South and Central American cuisine is that they tend to share these similar ingredients used in different ways. And so the reason I'm using this example is that when we look at vocation, when we think about, okay, what am I called to be in life, that the preparation between whether you might be called to be a priest or be married or devote yourself to the single life or devote yourself to the religious life, that the things you do to prepare, like the farming that you do to prepare, is pretty similar. That as I talked about with the course, our goal is to really take a look at the things, the ingredients, the tools in order to find a vocation. And so you're going to need a really solid community around you. You're going to need some time for prayer and deep reflection, often in solitude and sometimes in community. You're going to devote yourself to meaningful work. You're going to steward the environment. You're going to steward your resources and be generous with them. And you're going to take some time for meaningful rest. And the thing is that with this balance between time with people and time apart, this time of working really hard and resting really, really well, of gaining resources and using them effectively and giving them back. That this way, this rhythm of life really will reveal your vocation. And I describe when I think about the various foods that might be made from this, these are kind of like the final Catholic vocations, that they are different in their particular style, but they're all attempting in slightly different ways to do the same thing. So I want to briefly take a look at the universal vocation. This is the vocation that we as Christians believe that all people are called to. And this is the love of God and neighbor. When we think about the Gospels, these are Jesus' two greatest commandments. And one of the ways that I think is this most beautifully is described, that phrasing is bad, but is through this angled mirror that I covered with my students last year in morality. That the way I love God is by being a mirror that reflects the beauty, the goodness, the reality of creation back up to God in praise and thanksgiving. So that I bring this praise and thanksgiving in blessing to God. And that this is where our role as priests comes in, is that as I'm acting, am I constantly reflecting creation back to God? And the main concern here is with reality and with the beauty of reality. And similarly, humans are called to reflect God's character of love, compassion, of giving dignity, and bringing justice. We bring that to the world. And so in the way that I see God being, am I reflecting that to others? That, as it says, reflect God's character to the world through bringing justice with love, mercy, and respect. That when people see what I'm doing, are they coming away with some idea of what God is like? And not in order to raise myself up, but basically to bring intentionality, to bring blessing to this space. And so this is the essence of it. Or, it could be put just with those two great commandments: to love God, to reflect the goodness of of reality of creation up to God, and then to love your neighbor, to reflect God's character to others. And we believe that everyone is called to this in some way, and this will be different. Now, obviously, not everyone here will be I don't feel called to love God, but I do feel called to love neighbor. And I encourage you to still wrestle with that first part, to love God, but also to find common ground in that love of neighbor. So there are 4 final Catholic vocations. As I said before, they are the consecrated life, priesthood, married life, and dedicated single life. I'll be focusing on one each in these short little lectures. Today is going to be focused on the consecrated life. So part of the way to understand the consecrated life is to understand that each order, each society, each community within the consecrated life has a particular charism or mission statement or passion. And I'm actually getting ahead of myself. The consecrated life would be like monks, nuns, sisters, brothers, people who wear habits and are part of particular communities. The Christian Brothers is one. The Franciscans are one. The Jesuits are one. The Dominicans are another one. These are pretty prevalent throughout the U.S. and throughout the world. And they each have a variety of charisms, and a charism is a particular skill set, a passion, a gift, or essential intent given by God. And this is important because a lot of the work of vocation, you might see this in the critical journey, the stages of faith, is eventually discovering your gifts and talents and putting them to work in the world, in love of neighbor and love of God. And so just to give you an example of how people might have different charisms, I'm not finding a good place for me to be here. So would be that when we think about the way we work best, there tend to be three primary types of jobs. And I'll go through them in order, and we'll talk a little bit about how one is not necessarily more important than the other, even though we tend to need more of some of them than the others. So the first one would be the producer. And a producer actually makes things happen. They tend to be marked by hands-on work. And they're often given tasks to complete by others. So we should be thinking, farmers. We should be thinking electricians. We should be thinking cooks, chefs. We should be thinking about coders. We should be thinking about often engineers and commissioned artists, architects. These are often producers. And they often have a real tangible connection between the work done and the result. And that can be really powerful. A lot of people find a lot of value with that because it's easy to see the value. I don't need to think like, am I actually doing something that matters? To be like, yeah, like I designed that building. I built that thing. I made food for these people to eat. Like I created this website. You can see the results of your work much more tangibly if you're a producer. Now, there will tend to be less need for the next group, but another group is managers. And managers tend to work to maintain and control systems through consistency and accountability with the goal of efficiency and stability. So their goal is to take something that's working and make it work better and make it continue to work. And this is a really essential skill in dealing with people, in dealing with the way people interact with environments, and having effective managers is crucial to having the success of something continue through time. It's crucial to having something maintain a particular character throughout time. Now, we often see the value and the distinction between producer and manager, but we often don't see the distinction between manager and leader because we often assume that they're the same thing. Now, a leader tends to focus more on vision and inspiration and giving a mission to a group. And one of the things that tends to be distinctive between a leader and a manager is that a leader tends to really take the long view as opposed to the day-to-day, and tends to really welcome chaos rather than focusing on efficiency and neatness. And rather than the technical day-to-day work, they tend to be a bit more abstract and creative. And so in a sense, like a leader provides a mission, a direction, a long view goal for a group. A manager maintains that through the day-to-day, and the producers are the ones that actually make it happen. And if you look at any community task, they tend to require some level of all three. Now, and a person could be just one of these, a person could be multiple of these, and we tend to find that we are more comfortable, we thrive best in 1 to 2 of these. Every once in a while, you will have someone who really can do it all, who can produce, who can manage, and who can lead. But most people tend to really excel in one or 2 of these faculties. So for instance, I would say that I tend to enjoy the leadership role of thinking a lot about the vision for a group and looking at where are we going in the long term, and And I also like to be given tasks by others that are very clear, and then I just produce. I just make something happen. And I am weak at the day-to-day consistency. You may have noticed that we stopped listening to music at the beginning of the class. That's a weakness of my ability as a manager. And so one of the reasons I bring this up is that it's valuable to think like, okay, what's my charism? Where do I both thrive and want to be? And so I want you to think about that for a few minutes. So I have this picture for you, partially because when we think about the consecrated life, most people in modern society find a disconnect between like, okay, so why is Mr. Kendrick talking first about becoming a monk or a nun? Like very, very few people do this anymore. And that is true. Now, but at the same time, I find it very interesting that there is this focus and this value on university education. Partially because university education tends to be where you go and enter a particular community to focus on the charism of education and skill building for a number of years with people who are all pursuing the same thing. That most people pursue it as a pretty exclusive vocation for a number of years, rather than having it just be like part of what they're doing while they do other work. And this is interesting because like even as I look at this picture, the design of most universities tends to look somewhat similar to a monastery, and many of the earliest universities were developed kind of similar to that monastic style or even run by particular religious orders. And so as we are elevating one thing and not really focusing on another, there is kind of an interesting similarity there, that the intentional focus on a mission by going to a place and focusing on it and being around people who are also focused on that thing is important. Now, for some people, it is appropriate for a few years, but for some people, they might want to continue that kind of focus and that kind of community for a lifetime. And this is where the value of religious orders makes a lot of sense. And so one of the things that highlights a religious vocation is the three vows that religious orders, they'll all take three vows when they decide to ultimately become a member of a particular order. They're ultimately called to be in a particular order. And these vows are poverty, chastity, and obedience. And these vows were designed so that the community and those in the community would follow the way of Jesus quite literally. Jesus was a traveling preacher. If you look at the Gospels, Jesus tended to rely on people's hospitality as he taught and didn't seem to own anything. In fact, when they split his possessions at his death among the soldiers, all he has is the clothes on his back. And so the first vow is poverty, that those in religious orders sacrifice private personal ownership of things in order to serve the community, both those in the community through shared possessions and those outside the community by not being distracted by material wealth or success in order to serve others. Secondly, they take a vow of chastity. Now, this is different from the virtue of chastity. What it means in this case is that they sacrifice all romantic relationships for the sake of the fellowship of the brothers or the sisters. And this makes sense because, after graduating college, I valued that mission, that idea of a close community. And I thought to myself, as many people as they leave college think, they'll be like, you don't just need to become lame when you get older. And, we have this great thing going, like, why don't we keep it going? And we did for a while. And the thing is that people start dating other people, and people who start to get into serious romantic relationships tend eventually to not want to just be with, live with the people that are their best friends. And this is not a bad thing. This is a very natural thing. And so when we think about if you're going to live with your brothers or live with your sisters for your whole life, that sacrificing romantic relationships is quite reasonable for the sake of that fellowship. And it is also one of the ways that people in the consecrated life follow Jesus literally. Jesus, when we look at the wealth of the scriptures, he had no romantic relationships and he was not married. And this is notable because there was no problem with a rabbi being married. And so it wasn't like, oh no, if Jesus was married, like everything would be ruined. It's that, no, it's not like mentioned. It's not addressed. And and that he didn't have romantic relationships. And this could be a call for some people. The third call is, and the third vow is obedience, where you sacrifice your personal preference, your personal desire for the sake of the community. So if you have a particular call towards mission, your order might send you to a particular country or a particular community, and you go. Like that's part of the vow of obedience. And each particular community, each particular order has particular charisms or passions or mission statements. It could be hospitality, to invite anyone in who needs help. It could be service to the poor or focus on people at the margins of society. It could be a focus on preaching and teaching. It could be focused on healthcare or service, things like that. There are a variety of different charisms that different groups can have. And basically, like, if something like that is calling you, if you're like, man, I have a real passion for this, that's a sign of a charism. Not necessarily that you're called to be in the consecrated life, but that this is something that you should pursue, that you should think about, like, how can I really pursue this call? So we're going to focus for the time being on one order, which is the Benedictines. And the reason I choose this one is that I think that their way of life is particularly prophetic, speaks a lot of wisdom to our time. The Benedictines were one of the first religious orders, and I think that's also of great value. So one of their things that highlights them is their charism of stability, that traditionally, and this is still the case today, that if you enter into a Benedictine monastery, you tend to stay there for life. And the goal is to really be present to where you're at, that the focus on the community should be on the people around you. As G.K. Chesterton said, that we're called to love our neighbors and to love our enemies, and that's not incidental because often our neighbors and our enemies are the same people. I often look at suburban society and I think about how crazy it is that there can be so little community between the people that I live near on a day-to-day basis. And when I think about the value of community and some of the difficulties with urban living, and as our world becomes more urban, this question of stability, of recognizing where you're at in a place, becomes really crucial. Additionally, when I think about the call to address climate change and this really great focus on buying local and thinking about how can I minimize my global my carbon footprint by traveling less and things like that, that really the call to focus on where you're at is like screaming at us from all different angles of, like, you need to know the people around you. You need to support the people around you. And you need to get your food, you need to get your supplies, you need to get your resources from the things around you. This is crucial. And the reason I have this little picture here is that there is a strong push against this within our culture. That one of the things that people like, and I would say that this is not a complete criticism, but they like about Starbucks is that you go into any Starbucks around the world and you have a pretty similar experience. That they tend not to be obsessively focused on the particular culture of that place. Now there are going to be some differences, but you tend to know what you're going to get. And kind of similar with other placeless enterprises like McDonald's, that if I go into one around the world, I tend to receive a pretty similar experience. And this call to really focus on where we're at is really important. Another really important call is they have a charism of prayer and work and a balance of it, that they're constantly practicing their crafts, whether it be making great bread or making great candles or great honey and jams or various beers and wines or cheeses, that Benedictines focus on their craft and focus on remembering the presence of God as they practice their craft. And when I think about where our world is going as we become more technologically connected and dependent, and when we think about how our innovations in AI and things are going to cause great disruption to the way we view our workforce, that in many ways the craft of work becomes more important. And so I chose this picture by Charlie McKeesy, partially because it's so rough and yet so intentional. And I think I love that he focuses on hugs, and at the same time there is kind of this gothic kind of dark undertone there, that's like in the midst of this mourning there is this love. And when I think about the craftsman and having a craftsman's mindset to your work, I think this is a great message in light of our current cultural moment. I'm going to move up here. So the next one is, so Benedictines, by staying in the monastery, you might be like, so how are they serving the greater community? And it is by being, as some might say, like an outpost to the kingdom of God, and some might say a retreat. I prefer the term outpost in the sense that that should be going out and being a place where people can come for safety, for healing in a dangerous landscape. And so basically it should be a place where people can come to be revived. And when I think about this as people who are not necessarily Benedictines themselves, that the way we view our table, the way we view our home table is crucial. I think about in Les Miserables, the way the bishop treats Jean Valjean, and that we should treat any who come to our table like Jesus himself. And then also, as we are called to support people on the margins of society and to center their experience, that we should do so with our own tables. That if we desire to be inclusive, we should be inclusive at our own tables. And this idea is present in our cooking project. You might notice one of those quotes that I highlighted, and I've really started developing this thought, and I want to make this part of my practice, especially when I get married, when I have my own place, not my own place, but with my wife, my future wife. And I got this idea from Brian Loritz, and he talks a lot about that your community is reflected in your table. And so when we think about a lot of the divisions and issues in our society, from systemic racism and from polarization politically and things like this, and cancel culture, that a healthy and robust practice of hospitality calls to us. And similarly, some of you listened to Sister Rosemary Nairumbe last year, and how she acted towards the child soldiers who came and asked them how she could help them. And I think that she really exemplifies this way of seeing Jesus in any who come to you, even if they might kill everybody in your community. She really exemplifies that joy and that profound courage that a real robust hospitality requires. Okay, I'm going to move again. So, another thing that the Benedictines focus on is that kind of stage 3 faith, where you have a lot of time for contemplation, for silence. And one of the things that is within that, we often see that from the outside as very strict and they're trying to control everything. But within that balance, within work and prayer and time for silence and study and hospitality, that when you're not focused on achieving or gaining material possessions or material success for yourself, there can be more of a freedom to enjoy learning, to enjoy curiosity, to kind of sit in wonder as you both work and rest and contemplate. And I have this image from the movie Coco, partially because it's incredibly beautiful, and that when I consider a lot of the great works of art, even the modern great works of art, that art requires a sense of really honest exploration and curiosity and freedom, and that this is in the way of holy leisure, that our society tends to push us towards busyness, that we should always have something going on. And to be perfectly honest, people who make great art tend to not force things to happen. They can have this sense of holy leisure as they work. And so the reason I have this book, Deep Work, we're going to take a brief look at it later in the course, that Cal Newport in this book, he talks about how we should be training ourselves to build times of intense focus and productivity. And part of the key of that is to really value these times of boredom, because these times of boredom can create curiosity. And he also argues that we should schedule our distractions, and that we should set aside time to be distracted. And that in a sense, that by really valuing and giving weight to boredom and to distraction or relaxation, this will in turn allow us to be more meaningfully productive and curious and interested in what's going on within us, around us, and in the world. So that's these are the ways that I think that the Benedictine order can be prophetic for our time. I encourage you to think about these things and notice where I'm kind of pushing us to think about this in the way we're actually living our everyday lives. Thank you.